Well, good afternoon. If you are in New York City or places north and south, good evening. If you are lucky enough to be in Rome, Italy, or places north and south, and good overnight and good morning to people all over the world. This is Fred Plotkin on Fridays on Adagio, the place where classical music happens. As you know, Adagio is a video and audio streaming platform dedicated to supporting artists and to making classical music and opera available to fans all around the world. And today, my guest is someone whom I've known for quite a while, even though she's exceedingly young. But I must have met her in her infancy because I've known you for a long time. It's Courtney Mills. Now, I never asked you, do you go by Courtney A. Mills, your middle name is Ann, or Courtney Mills?
I go by whatever you want to call me. Usually, for professional reasons, it's Courtney Ann Mills, just because there are some other people named Courtney Mills. I think there's a DJ named Courtney Mills, and I don't want people to get confused. So my website and
Okay.
everything is usually Courtney Ann.
So Courtney is American. I've noticed lately that I've had numerous guests who are Americans but have the good fortune to live in Italy, and you are one of those people. You live in
Yes,
Rome,
yes. I think we definitely share the love for Italy.
definitely. But
I
I'm
have lived.
unfortunately not right there. I wish I were there right now. I'm not. I'm in New York, which is great,
Mm,
but I'd rather be in Rome right now.
well, you're always welcome.
Thank
I
you.
have an extra room, and
Thank
you know
you.
all of the best restaurants, so we would have a great time, I'm sure.
True. And I'll
But
cook.
yeah, I'm lucky. I've been here for about 8 years now.
So that's what I want to talk to you about. When I met you, you were a what we call a young artist in New York as soprano, an excellent soprano. Your abilities were made known to me by many people who said this is someone you have to hear. And you had a career in the United States. You early on pursued a career in Europe as well. And when I have guests on such as you, I'm always interested in the life journey and how
Mhm.
someone wound up where she wound up and why, because each person on their life's journey is taken in different directions. And to some degree, it's choice, and to some degree, it's fate and luck. So, how did you wind up in Rome 8 years ago?
Well, my mother would say fact is crazier than fiction, and I think that's true. My path was not at all what I expected, or when you're a young student in high school or college planning your life, it's been nothing what I expected. But it's been an amazing ride so far. Hopefully, I've got still a lot of road left. But it's really thanks to the Metropolitan Opera that I'm here in Italy now, because as you know, part of the program, at least when I was there, the wonderful sponsors of the Met, they donate for different programs that we have, and one of them was to come and study the languages that we sing in the native countries. So one summer I chose Italy, and I did a month in Rome, and then I had like 3 weeks, I think, in Verona. And I loved Verona as well, but every weekend I was on the train coming back to Rome. Like, it was just one of the most incredible summers of my life. Living in Rome, it's literally like living in a museum, and the energy is incredible. It's got the arts and the culture and everything, but also maybe because there's so many tourists, you're always feeling like you're experiencing life from a touristic view. Even though it's home now and I know it very well, and I give friends tours and everything. And during COVID, I actually did virtual tours of Rome. Um, I'm always learning something. I'm always seeing something new. And it really feeds the roles that I sing as well, I think. So that's anyway kind of how I ended up here.
So, just to specify, if I'm correct, you are in the Metropolitan Opera's Lindemann Young Artist Program. Is that
Yeah.
correct? Which is
Yes.
an incredibly prestigious program. It's one of the great programs in the world. And you, that's when I met you because I teach at
Mhm.
New York University and you came to a lot of my classes and which were about opera. And so I recognized immediately. I mean, one only has to look at you for 30 seconds to know that you're an opera singer. And so, and let me specify why, not for stereotypical reasons. In your mask, this area here below the eyes, the cheeks, the construction. There's just something about opera singers that they often have that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not
Yeah.
because you're blonde. It, it's
Blonde
no,
and a soprano. It's over.
no, because for example, without generalizing, many Koreans have this mask,
Yes.
this facial structure, and that's why disproportionately there are so many excellent Korean opera singers.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yep.
and I can spot an opera singer almost anywhere, and they're always surprised when I ask them, "How long have you been in opera?" And occasionally they'll say, "Well, I'm not an opera singer, but people tell me I should be."
Mm-hmm.
And so this leads to a question: when did you first recognize in yourself your ability as a singer, or that you had
Oh,
the natural gifts?
okay. So I am lucky to have been adopted by two incredible parents from when I was a baby. And so it's not genetic, um, or it could be, but we don't know. But they have always been super supportive of anything that I've been interested in, even though opera was not something that they had ever really been into so much. But I do remember growing up, they would always play symphonies and things like that for me, especially piano music, Chopin, when I was going to sleep at night. And being a child that is not genetically the same as the parents, your parents are always kind of looking just to kind of understand you better, to see what you do differently. And my mom said, like, when I was a baby, I would just sit around and make sounds and make all of these different things. And she's like, you were making Chinese sounds or more Russian sounds, or just always playing with sound. And it might be because I had my ears really blocked when I was little, so maybe the internal sounds were really interesting to me as well. But my first words were actually to a song, because we were in a long car ride, and you remember how the radio shows would always play the same songs over and over again, and you would get to a new area and it would just be the same song. So Barbara Ann came on many times in this road trip. And so by the time we were close to my grandparents' house, I was singing along and getting some of the words. And this was before I was talking.
Hmm.
So music has always been in me, and it has to come out in
Hmm.
some
Yeah.
sort of way. And I fell in love with old movies and Disney movies. So that was my entrance into singing. I would, whenever someone would come over, it would be Somewhere Over the Rainbow or The Little Mermaid happening. And my mom would be like, stop that. But yeah, so I got to go to Interlochen Arts Academy
In
because I
Michigan.
went to the summer camp. Hmm.
In Michigan, yeah.
In Michigan, yeah. And another alumni is Jessie Norman. She went
Hmm.
at least to the camp. But I went to the camp and I wanted to go to the academy, but I knew it was very expensive and my parents would be like, probably not. But I did the audition anyway. I got in. They sent the acceptance package to my parents' house because I just wanted them to send it. I didn't tell them. And so, of course, there was a conversation and they were like, that's great, but it's very expensive. It's high school, maybe not. And then we had a big civil rights case happen in my choir back home in Springfield, Illinois. And because of that, my parents were like, okay, you can go. So I was really lucky. I got to do my 2 years of my last 2 years of
Wait,
high
just
school
so I understand, how did the civil rights case connect to your going to the Interlochen music camp?
because we ended up having security guards and things like that in choir.
Uh-huh.
It was pretty bad. We were supposed to do HMS Pinafore, and we had an amazing stage director. This was the year before I went to Interlochen, and he had worked in New York and done big shows and things like that. And we had this amazing girl, like amazing. I have rivety or goosebumps just thinking about
Right.
how wonderful she was, or is probably still. I have not seen her in many, many years, but she had a true contralto voice in high school. She had this beautiful low sound, and they cast her. To be fair, the stage director called all of the parents first to make sure that everybody was okay with it, and he cast her as the tenor part, the male part.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And then the choir director, who was new, had a problem with that. And with the principal, they changed the cast list. But the problem was everybody already knew because the phone calls had been made. And this girl was also African American. And so then Jesse Jackson got involved. And it's still heartbreaking because she won the case. And the principal and the choir director lost their jobs. The stage directors decided not to come back, which is unfortunate. And then, the judge told her, because of the damages and because of how this has treated you as a young adult trying to find your way, you have options. Like, you can ask for the school to pay for your college or this and that. There was a list. And she said, all I really want is an apology.
Mm-hmm.
And she never got it.
Ah.
So yeah, so it was a bad situation. And because of that, my high school got a little bit contentious. And so my parents, with my wonderful voice teacher from high school, she was a jewel that we found. She talked to my dad one day and was like, look, this opportunity doesn't come around very often, and if she can go, let her go. And it was the best thing that could have happened. Not only musically, it was being around 400 other students my age in high school that nobody had told us no. Nobody,
Mm-hmm.
and everyone's like super talented, fine, whatever. But it's not about being a baby genius or you're so talented. It's about, this is my creativity. This is my joy. This is what makes me excited. Let me share it with you. And you have 400 kids with 4 different viewpoints from all around the world, bringing all these ideas and talents together with nobody telling you you can't, nobody telling you, that note was a little bit, or any of that. There was no negativity.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just incredible. It was such an incredible experience. And the school to date has been very good to me and everybody that I know. One of my best friends from that school, who ended up in college with me, and we've been friends since, she started a school in Afghanistan for musicians, especially girls.
Mm-hmm.
And it's called the Zora Orchestra, and they toured around Europe a bit.
I
And
have
then when
heard of it. Yeah.
the fall
Mm-hmm.
of Afghanistan happened again, music, of course, was I'm sure you saw the pictures, the musical instruments that were destroyed. That was the school.
Uh-huh.
So she was concerned about all of her students, obviously, and there was one exceptionally talented and gifted girl named Mina. And I worked with Robin to help try to find solutions for these kids, but especially Mina. And I said, Robin, we got to call Interlochen. And Interlochen took Mina, and you have to understand, I mean, I'm sure you do understand, but they studied music. They studied Western music. They also studied Afghan music, but they were very far behind in comparison to where we're expected to be as American students in the American education system. And they brought Mina in, and she has been high honors the entire time. She's absolutely killing it. And I think, she's always going to do music, but she's also an incredible speaker, and she has a lot to say. And so it was just really amazing to see our alma mater come in and really support a young student who had a lot to offer, but might not have been exactly where you expect someone to be at that point. Definitely financially was not a thing. She came in and they had a dorm room prepared for her with bedding, with a computer, with everything. It was really amazing.
So something that you are alluding to is something that I have always thought about, and it's something that I think cuts at least 2 ways and can cut many ways. Dr. Joseph Polizzi was the previous president of the Juilliard School,
Mm-hmm.
someone I knew well, who influenced me a lot, who I admired a great deal. And he taught a course when he was there called The Artist as Citizen. And it was focused on his belief and my belief and other people's belief that the musician, the actor, the dancer, the filmmaker, the performing or the creative artist is not necessarily required to also practice citizenship. And citizenship, I think, is a very American term, and we have an international audience, so I'll define it. It means taking on responsibilities of public service to benefit others, is
Mhm.
how I would define it. How would you define citizenship?
I agree. I agree. And I mean, we feel music in so many different ways, but I think the most beautiful thing about being an artist of any form of not just music, but especially for me, music is because it's international.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter where you're from, how you grew up, any of that. It doesn't matter if you understand the words, if there aren't words. It we all feel it. We can all connect through it. And I think that music might be the best form of diplomacy in some ways. Um, you can, I mean, it's they've always said this, but I don't know if anyone's paying attention to it anymore. But you can really tell how a civilization is doing or a government, a group of people by what is happening culturally in that country or place.
Mhm.
Um, when art and music are freely expressed. That goes into journalism as well. Um, being able to express yourself freely and being able to hear and accept other people's expressions through music or art or writing. That's when we have more hope. That's when we have more creativity. It keeps us alive as opposed to
Mhm.
dulled down, you know? And I think it's the responsibility of artists to really think about it, to really think about what you're doing and what you're putting out there. There are moments to do something that's really dark or votseki or whatever, to like have that also as something that people can discuss and talk about. But I think when you are capable of reaching a person through something that's not just language, it's a huge responsibility.
Well, Votseki will be my new adjective of the week.
I know, I know, I'm better at singing than talking, but it's fine.
So, for listeners, Alban Berg wrote a masterpiece opera in the 1920s called Votsek, which is very dark. But it's a very serious. It's a masterpiece work
Mhm.
with incredible orchestral passages as well, um,
Yes.
and that's what Courtney is referring to.
Yeah.
In our times, and not only, government or corporate or uh, royal support of the arts has sometimes been denied or manipulated
Mhm.
because those who potentially would fund the art form may fear the message. So certain art forms, such as orchestral music, would be more likely to get funding than a song or a play that has specific text
Yes.
and where the text may address something, um,
Hmm.
or where it may be considered controversial or adult or whatever. I always answer that when I'm asked about opera that it's supposed to be uh, highfalutin, whatever. That it's about death, sex, and money, and
Yeah.
basically those three things. Often about religion. It covers topics that human beings live with and address and often differ on, but they all experience.
Hmm.
And I'm always concerned about the fact that if you rely on funding for an art form, that you're only as free to express as the funding that you get.
Yes.
And there are some societies that may object to the content or the presentation of certain artistic expressions, but nonetheless understand the importance of having it be expressed. Other countries actively repress it. Um, I don't think you know this about me, Courtney, but after I left the Metropolitan Opera in 1988, I worked for much of the 1990s for the National Endowment of the Arts in the United States, which is funding for the arts. My
Hmm.
job was to visit opera companies and, in effect, inspect them and determine not whether they should continue to receive money from the National Endowment for the Arts, but how the money is being spent. And that I would make recommendations for how, I won't name companies, but most of the major companies in the United States, apart from the Met, because I was not sent to the Met because I had worked there, how these companies could use their funding better. So, in one important company in the South, I was asked to improve their communications and public relations. In an important company in the Midwest, I was asked to improve their relationship between the management and the board. In another company in the upper Midwest, I was asked to improve their educational programming. And so it varied all around the country. Um, this program that I did was abandoned when a certain, I don't want to get into politics here by naming names, but a certain very important government official who took power in the mid 1990s decided that opera was too controversial. Now, he personally loves opera, and I would often see him at the Kennedy Center in Washington attending performances, and he genuinely loves opera. He's still alive.
Hmm.
Um, I once asked him, I was seated next to him, what his favorite opera is. He said Rigoletto because it's good family values. Now,
Oh,
Rigoletto has
Lordy.
abduction, rape, murder, all of that, but it also has fantastic music. So
Yes.
he didn't quite fasten on that. But, I've always been aware that people fear the messages in art. Some people fear the messages in art. Other people are inspired and moved and so on. But, um, you know, I'm going to direct it to you as an opera singer.
Hmm.
You may appear in a masterpiece, let's say Turandot or The Ring Cycle or whatever, but if the production is such that it delivers a message, or it's not an interesting production, or it's a controversial production, or the director decides that Turandot should kill you herself, or who knows, um,
Right.
that some people find that objectionable. And so it goes completely beyond your work as a singer
Hmm.
to what other people perceive as the message of the opera. And I think it's puts too much of a burden on the opera singer who has enough to deal with, that she
Yeah.
does not have to also defend, quote, the message.
Yes. So that's an interesting an interesting topic. Especially if you think of Aidas and how, the conversation about if you should darken your skin tone or not. And then there are certain opera houses like the Arena, where they still do that. And a soprano was fired and whatever because she wouldn't do it here. Whereas another very famous soprano who decided to do it in New York, even though they told her not to. Um, I don't necessarily think that it is the singer's responsibility to tell the world exactly what they think about everything, because we are opera singers. We don't know everything about everything. Um,
Except Brunhilde.
except Brunhilde, obviously.
Alles weiß ich. She knows everything.
No, it's true. Because living in Italy, I can see both ends of that argument.
Yeah.
Because in Italy, they think, and I'm not speaking for everybody, but the majority is that Aida is a very regal, intelligent, loyal, all of the positive adjectives you can think of. That's Aida. So for you to whitewash her is racist. In America, any sort of darkening your skin tone is racist for obvious reasons.
Hmm.
Um, it becomes really difficult when a singer is put into a production where they are supposed to do something that they're not comfortable doing. Um, for example, for me, if I had to do a Salome, me being totally naked on stage is not really what I want to do. It's not my thing. I'm now at a point in my life where I will say no. If I feel really uncomfortable with something, I'm not going to do it. I think the opera world puts a lot of singers, especially young singers, through a lot of hoops unnecessarily. And I think that we get used to saying yes to many things that maybe we're not comfortable doing just because it's hard to pay the bills. It's always hard. It doesn't matter at what level you're at. I have a very good friend who is at the top of her game. She sings everywhere. And she had an issue with a contract with a major opera house, a big one, where she was making a huge debut. Everyone knows the singer. And they moved her from first cast to second cast, and they changed how many shows she was going to have. And then at the end of the day, the amount of performances was not going to cover the rehearsal period and everything else. So she had to decide if it was worth doing or not. And I was like, you just say no. You can say no. It is really hard for some singers to understand that they can say no. And I'm not working as much as some other singers because I say no. I say no if I know that I'm going to be in a situation that's uncomfortable. I don't want to do that. I maybe it's wrong, but I think that no is powerful, and I think it's also the job of the singers to stand up for things that they believe in. You don't have to do it in a big public way and go into the newspapers and do all this other stuff. You can, but you can say no, you know? And sometimes people respect you more for saying no.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel about yourself, but also maybe about others, that you have to give a reason for the no, or is no sufficient?
No, you always feel like you have to give a reason. I mean, even if I have to, move a phone call, I always come up with why, you know? Um, it's hard. It's hard, but yeah, I'm much older than when we met. So now I'm better at it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you have to protect your own energy in your own space. And in doing that, you can bring more to the projects that you do take on, and the job that you want to do, you can do a better job at. So I think anyway. But yes,
What
you can always say a scheduling problem. If it's about a contract, you can always say there's a scheduling problem.
I understand. Um, I've worked in opera since 1972, and when I was a teenager,
Mm-hmm.
and I I'm not a singer, but I've done everything but sing or conduct. And I realize too that sometimes out of sight is out of mind. And people may say, oh, Fred thinks he's too important, or Fred thinks that we're not good enough, or any number of those reasons. Sometimes I'm just too busy. Sometimes I'm not at all. But there are times when I know I don't have the energy to bring everything I would want to a project.
Yeah.
Because my feeling is that if I do commit, I have to do it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I have had situations where I've had a pretty good job I'm working on, and I get a fantastic offer. I have never turned down the job I committed to go for the fantastic offer. I've explained to the fantastic offer how grateful I am, and that because I'm a man of my word, I'm going to stick with the company doing the jobs that I'm doing for 1/4 the fee. But if you would consider inviting me back for the future, I would be very happy to come to you. That tends to work because
Yeah.
it's a degree of honesty, and people see that I uphold my contracts, which is
Mm-hmm.
very important. Um, Only one time in my whole career did I basically turn down a job that I'd committed to, and that was I'm a New Yorker. When we have had September 11th, 2001, I had a wonderful job offer at a very important company in a very far away place that I'd always wanted to work at that company. And it was 3 months, and it was a great theater. And, if you name the top opera houses in the world, I've worked in almost all of them. except Houston Grand Opera and this one.
Okay.
And but I had to turn them down because I felt that it was important that I be in New York in that period, that there was so much to do and things to clean up and people to protect and so on. And
Yeah.
they never asked me back, ever.
I
And
mean, that's something they say to young artists and people all the time, especially about the Met. Like if you say no to the Met once, they will never call you again. And I don't think that's true about the
nor do
Met.
I.
It's
Yeah.
true about certain places, maybe. But you know what? That's their loss.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, Fred, do I need to remind you about your biography? If they
Well,
don't have you there, that is their loss,
but
truly.
it's also experience. I mean, I mentioned Houston Grand Opera. I've never worked there and I would love to work there because I know it's a marvelous company. And
Mm-hmm.
everyone I know who has had experience there has had wonderful things to say. So if that ever came to pass, I'd be very happy. This other company is geographically much further away. It's not in the United States, it's not in the Americas. And so for that reason, I would have to block the time and have a
Yeah.
special project and agree to go to this faraway place for 3 months. And
Mm-hmm.
it's something I'd be glad to do. Um, Also, managements change in companies.
Yes, big time.
So therefore, again, I'm not naming names, but there was a very fine administrator at a major company in Europe, and he used to engage me to do a lot of work, and I loved working in the theater that he ran. When he moved to another important theater, he invited me to work in his new theater, but his replacement at the old theater would never have me.
Okay.
And not, I think, because of anything about me, but because the new manager at the old theater wanted his own people. And I get
Right.
that.
It's always politics.
Yeah.
It was
Well,
interesting. My first year at the Met was Peter Gelb's first year at the Met.
hmm.
So there was a lot of people leaving and a lot of
Yeah.
new people coming in.
Yeah.
And now if I look at who's there from when I was there, because I was there under Maestro Levine. And when he passed, it's all new people. I
Hmm.
mean, there's still Peter Gelb and I think Jonathan Friend's still there, yeah.
In a
Um,
sort of advisory way. Yeah.
okay, yeah. But yeah,
Michael
it's
Hastings does that job now.
oh right, Michael.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
From
when I was
Houston.
at when
Yeah.
I was in the Young Artist program, Michael was playing my lessons with Diana Soviero
Okay.
because he's an amazing pianist coach as well, like
Hmm.
incredible. So yeah, it's really cool also to see where people end up and how they grow and things change. It's really exciting. But
This
it's
brings me back to you're a young woman from Illinois,
mhm.
Central Illinois, not Chicago, who wound up in the Met Young Artist Program, which is already a rather rare event. And then you wound up in Italy. You went to study Italian, but you
Yep.
stayed.
Well, there's gaps in between. So
Okay.
I was in the Young Artist program, came for the summer, studied, fell in love with Rome, threw too many coins in the fountain, which is why now I live here. And but in between there were lots of things that happened. Again, my path has not always been the most obvious one. Um, I did 2 years in the Met Young Artist program. And then they agreed with a famous soprano who had come to visit and do master classes that I should go and live with her in England. Um, she's a famous dame. And I went there. The Met sponsored it. And then from there, she introduced me to Dennis O'Neill, the tenor. And he had a program in Cardiff. I think he still has a program in Cardiff, but it's different than the one that I was in. And that, along with Interlochen and the Met program, was one of the most incredible experiences of my life. I would wake up in the morning and I would like do my own yoga, workout, dance, whatever. I was feeling amazing. And then I would go sing for hours a day and then like run around the park and go to bed. Like it was an amazing experience. And the thing is, every 2 weeks there were new master teachers that would come in, but these master teachers were Richard Bonning, June Anderson, like the top of the top of the top. Carlo Rizzi came, and it was another environment, which this is very important for singers and nobody talks about it, where people were encouraging. I could take music that I had never studied before to a coaching and work on it with a pianist there and not be judged or treated in a certain way. Whereas other programs, especially ones that are more focused on productions and not young artists, want you 100% prepared with everything that you sing. So there's never a moment to actually study it or to try something out or whatever. And so in Cardiff, I was allowed to really develop as an artist because I could take things in and try them and realize if they worked or if they didn't. And I'm a singer that I played the flute and violin growing up, so I can read music and I can do all of the things on my own. But doing it with a pianist for me is crucial. It's how I memorize. If I've done it with piano, it's memorized faster. You get more of the style. You feel like you're a part of an ensemble in some sort of way. It's really helpful for me. Everybody learns differently, but for me, that's important. And so, like, for example, Richard Bonning was there for 2 weeks. And unfortunately for the other singers, most everybody was sick, but I was not. Thank God. And so I ended up having 2-3 hours a day with Richard Bonning because people were canceling their times, and I would put my name in and I would get to work with him extra time. So I was working on most of the repertoire that you know me as a singer. I worked on Andre Chenier with him, and I worked on Tosca and Lady Macbeth and these things that are vocally my voice type. Which is not necessarily the operas that he did so much. They're not Joan Sutherland. I mean, she could do them, but they're not, his most famous works. And so once I ran out of the rep that I was working on for the things that I needed to do, I still had all this time. And so I said, excuse me, maestro, is it okay if I bring you some music that might not be perfect for me, but I really love? And he said, yes. And so I went in and I worked on Lucia with him. And the only other person that said that they would like a voice my size singing Lucia was James Levine. Mm-hmm. But again, when I sang it for James Levine and also for Richard Bonning, I was quite a bit younger. But usually as a bigger voice, especially in today's climate, you get pushed into the big stuff really fast, and nobody wants to hear anything else. And I also worked on Mimi with Maestro Bonning, and at the end of the week he said, the two things that I would like to really work on with you, or maybe if I was like hiring for something that I would want you to do now, would be the Mimi and the Lucia. And that was just like, wow, because I had never been able to experiment with that stuff because it wasn't where people saw me. It's not where they fit me into the puzzle. In the past, big voices like Jessie Norman, she's famous for Wagner, of course, but she also sang a lot of Mozart, right?
Yeah.
Big voices don't get to do that
and
anymore.
Gluck.
And Gluck.
She sang a great deal of Gluck.
Yes.
And that's a whole other voice in its way than Wagner or Strauss.
Right. So when people are like, oh, if there was something crazy that you could have done, growing up or whatever, looking back, Jamie Barton and I are the same class. We came from Indiana together. Doing Così fan tutte with Jamie Barton would have been an amazing experience. Jamie and I balance each other pretty well. She's the powerhouse, and who knows? 100 years ago, that might have been a possibility. 50 years ago, that might have been a possibility. Now it's never. I'm never gonna get cast as Fiordalici. It's just not gonna happen.
Jessie Norman sang Fiordalici.
I know.
Yeah.
So my first opera thing for like an audience outside of Interlaken was we were taken to Detroit to the African American Museum there, where Jesse Norman was doing a concert of spirituals. Um, and we got to sing for her during this meal thing. And it was in this crazy space. It had like a glass ceiling. It was very boomy or whatever, but we met her right beforehand. And we were like, oh, it's so nice to meet you. And she's like, what are you guys going to do? And we're like, we're doing scenes from Cozy fan tutte. And she looked at me and she goes, you're going to sing Fiordaligi, right? It's like what you said earlier in the beginning of the call. And I was like, yes. And then I got to sing Fiordaligi for Jesse Norman at,
Right.
how old was I? 17,
Hmm.
something crazy. And that was, one of the moments in your life that's just special that you wish you could keep in a bottle. you know.
Did I know Richard Bonning? I had the great fortune to work with him a lot, and I adore him. Did the role of Desdemona come up at all?
Yes. We did work
Because
on that as
that,
well.
me knowing
Um,
your voice, that would be natural.
oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah.
And I remember something that you wrote a while ago. It was for, was it the Garies? It was one of the competitions, and you were there. And whenever you have anything to say, it's like so special for me. And Isaiah Savage and I had both won prizes. I think he had won the Wagner. Oh, it was the listener back when they did the Wagner stuff. He had won the Wagner prize, and I had won the normal prize. But I had sung in a Wagnerian aria, and you had said that we would potentially be this generation's Otello and Desdemona. And that like made my heart go like
Mhm.
this. Because, I've always really respected and admired you. And
Thank you.
it's true. And so also being a part of your podcast is quite a blessing.
Mhm.
But yes, I have also Desdemona, a very special place in my heart for her as well, because somebody else that I really care a lot about that I didn't get to work with as much as I would have liked to. Who knows? Maybe in the future, if he's up for it, we'll get to do something again. But Craig Rutenberg was
Mhm.
one of the first big coaches that I worked with at Chautauqua, thanks to Marlena Malice. And Marlena Malice brought together all of these greats. Like I think that summer Stephen Lord was probably there, and I mean it was just the list was incredible.
So since you mentioned Marlena, and I was going to bring
Mhm,
her up, Marlena died in December of 2023,
I
and
know.
she was, by almost everybody's consideration, one of the greatest voice teachers ever.
Hmm.
And everyone studied with her. What made her great?
Gosh. I think she had the ability to really see her students and connect to them beyond vocal technique. I went and I did her program when I was 19 at Chautauqua, and I had auditioned for Juilliard, Curtis, and Manhattan from Interlochen. And it was kind of well known that whichever one of those three schools she suggested that you go to was the one of those three schools that you got accepted into, which was very true with all of the singers from Interlochen that auditioned for her. And my voice teacher ended up telling me from high school, maybe you're not ready for New York yet because you need to be a full human being. You need to be able to have defenses for things because New York is not a small town. It's not easy. New York's not easy. It's an amazing city with great energy and everything else. But her suggestion was that maybe I wait to go to New York. So I did not go and study with Marlena, even though I think having studied with her in New York would have been a great thing for me. But I went to Indiana and I studied with Pat Wise, and that was amazing. And I love Miss Wise very much. So
And
during the
just for
summer,
international listeners, Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana, is one of the great opera schools and music schools in the world. But
mhm,
the way I would describe it is it's not a factory, but they produce a lot. They produce a lot of musicians, a lot of content, a lot of work, and
mhm.
you get a lot of a lot for your money at Indiana University, but it's not like a certain other program that you mentioned where it's described often as having show ponies, where they may have 12 outstanding
Right.
voices who are groomed as voices only. And
Hmm.
if a little acting gets thrown in and a little language gets thrown in, there's that. But these are voices. And I know some of these show ponies and I've worked with them, and they're glorious singers, but they're not necessarily interesting artists. Whereas in Indiana, you get the whole package.
Fair.
Yeah.
There's definitely bonuses or pluses and negatives to both. I think coming from Interlochen, not going to a conservatory right away was a good choice, because I was already in one. So I got to kind of experience the sorority type of situation, or the different things, and for me that was good. Indiana was also not the perfect place for me for many reasons. They had about 500 singers, I think. And of those 500 singers, there was me, Jamie Barton, Jordan Bish, Kate Lindsay. This is an impressive list. And then in
Yes.
the older group, not that they're old, but like they were master's students or whatever. There was Larry Brownlee, and the year that he won the Met competition, there was also another singer from his studio that won the Met competition, which I do not remember her name. But there were a handful of us that made it to the Met. However, there were hundreds that did not. And a
Hmm.
lot of them were straight A students, and a lot of them spent all the money and did all of the things. And I think there's something dangerous in the opera world when so many people are accepted and told that they're going to make it in some way if they jump through all the hoops and pay all of the things, and then they don't. That was the hardest part of Indiana for me, was just seeing all of these people and knowing that they're paying for a vocal performance major,
Hmm.
and a lot of them are not going to be performers.
Yeah.
Whereas the more conservatory, smaller groups, those 12 singers, usually at least 10 of them will probably end up in that world singing,
Yeah.
hopefully.
Hmm.
But yeah, that's just one thing that I understand the factory thing, and yeah, I think it's important. The other thing too is just school is so expensive. Living in Europe, this is just a side note, but Santa Cecilia, I remember when I was looking through the books, you remember those giant books of colleges that you can like apply to, and they're all this, and I came across Santa Cecilia and I was like, Mom, look at this school in Rome. I remember this. I was like, I could study in Italy. And my mom's like, no, that's crazy. Like, you should go to like a normal the school in the States. Looking back, Santa Cecilia costs 1,200 a year. That's it.
I
Do
can
you know how
top that.
expensive Juilliard is now?
I mean, I'm older, so that I went to what's called DAMS, Dipartimento di Arte, Musica e Spettacolo, which is Italy's Juilliard. It's at the
Oh
University of
wow.
Bologna. And I was the first foreign student. And my fees in the mid 1970s were $150 a year for all of
Right.
my education. And I got to eat tortellini and, learn how to cook bolognese. So it was a
Exactly.
remarkable, but
Yeah.
school in Italy has its challenges because you have to understand there how to navigate there, but
Mhm.
you have great professionals, and if they take you under their wing, you learn an incredible amount. And as you said earlier, you go there to learn the language and the culture.
Yeah.
And if you want to sing Italian opera, which recently was named by UNESCO as something to be safeguarded as a world treasure.
Yep.
Um,
And that's thanks to a friend of mine, Alfonso. He's
oh, really?
yeah, he's the one who was pushing it through. And so yeah, it's really exciting. It's really
Yeah.
exciting.
So living in Italy, I'm going to make this observation. If you disagree, go right ahead.
Hmm.
I knew you before you went to Italy.
Yes.
Beautiful woman. I know
Thank
you
you.
in Italy now. More beautiful woman.
Oh, thank you.
Um, and I think I've never asked you this, but I've always wondered, How has Italy impacted on your sense of style and aesthetic?
Oh, wow. Hmm. Well, I guess I wear less black than New York City. New York City, I wear a lot of black. Um, my style and my aesthetic. I've always loved old movies and I've always loved, Maria Callas's style, not that I could fit into any of her clothes. But yeah, I think the more timeless Roman look has become more of where I tend to head. Maybe also very feminine looks are very popular here, and that is leads itself very well to what I feel and like as well. And then because we're talking about fashion and style and everything else, this is just a fun little side note. Being in Italy, you get to be around things that are historical, and things can kind of fall into your lap occasionally. And I know you've seen my headshot with the crown. I don't know if I ever told you the story behind that, but it was a crown designed by Zeffirelli. It came with a letter to my friend that he gifted it to, saying that he designed it for Aida at La Scala, and they have Casotto's everything, the dress and her crown and everything, and her crown matches the colors and all of that. And my friend actually gifted it to me, and I have it.
Hmm.
And what's interesting
Oh,
is Aida doesn't get to wear a crown, but because it was Maria Callas, she did.
true. But
So
wait a minute, would that have been Zeffirelli or
it was Zeffirelli.
Visconti?
No, it was Zeffirelli.
Oh, really? Okay.
I'll send you outside of this. I'll send
Yeah.
you because actually at La Scala they have the costume and everything from Amneris, and her crown is like this, but much bigger. It
Well, wait a
has
minute.
like a whole thing.
Collis would have done Aida.
Right.
In fact, that was her debut at La Scala, unexpected. I forget. I think she replaced Bernarda Tebaldi.
I think you're right. I
She
think
was
you're
not
right.
supposed to sing for her debut Aida,
Mhm.
but that's what she wound up singing in, I think, in 1950 or so. Um, no, but what I mean is, and I've seen this in myself and in many other people who have moved to Italy, that you just absorb the style, the aesthetic, that it becomes part of who you are. At the age of 19 and 20, living in Bologna, acquired much more sensitivity about fabrics, about
Yes.
colors, about um, not necessarily dressing in what we think of as a high style way, but
Hmm.
in an attractive, appealing way where the cut was always good, the material was good, the ability to maintain your clothing was something you learned.
Right. And not needing as much. I
Yeah,
find that people here, they don't have closets. New, like shocking. The closets are not a thing in Italy.
right.
We have armadios. And
Yeah.
so people have a lot less, but they in some way can kind of do more with it. Like they'll dress it up in a different way. Scarves are big, especially also in France. Like summer wear, like I'm obsessed with Italy in the summer. You can throw on a nice summer dress and go to the beach, and yeah, it's more relaxed, but at the same time everybody always looks pretty sharp.
But I've seen pictures of you in recent years because for the whole pandemic, I have been in New York. The last time I was in Italy was I was working at La Scala October of 2019. So, in Rome, it's been longer. But I've seen pictures of you in France, in Italy, that where you're in performance, but not in costume, but wearing a dress or a gown or something.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you look different from a lot of your American colleagues who look like you.
Oh, really?
Yeah, definitely.
I
You
never really thought about it. I know that I know that I always feel, which is silly, but I always feel like maybe a little bit of a financial crunch thinking about gowns, because gowns can be really crazy expensive. Like when I was at the Met, we had a budget for clothing, And so some of the nicest clothes that I've bought in my life was during that period. So I've found ways to buy something like the basic dress, which is maybe not that crazy expensive. It's just it's a beautiful dress, and then you find the right shawl to put on top of it. Or I've also sung in Fashion Week in France and also New York, and so occasionally a designer will gift me something. And being a bigger person, it tends to be an outer something. So like I have a very long opera coat that's black and it goes far. And so that's an easy thing to throw on over like a more simple dress and really make it look like something. Also something that I love to do, I love to go to fabric shops and I buy big pieces of fabric that like I pretty much wrap it around myself and it touches the floor on one side, touches the floor on the other, and I have them cut it, and then you can put it over a black dress or you can put it over a specific color dress. I like doing that too. I think not not being able to just buy off the rack like some of the smaller girls, you get a little bit more creative. Um because you kind of have to. And so yeah, a lot of my looks I think are things that I just kind of like piece together, that I found things that just worked and they go well together.
But I
Um
guess part of my
but I
question
have
is,
been lucky and I have been gifted some things.
yeah, but I think part of my question is they didn't do that in Illinois, and they didn't really do that in New York, to be
No, New
perfectly
York, it was
candid.
like you go to Saks and you see what they have in the plus size section, or you go to
Right,
Macy's and you go to the top floor. Like,
right. But
yes.
therefore, I mean, I've seen images of you in France and Italy, and it clearly bespeaks the absorption, the acquisition of that aesthetic of those places. And that, a larger person does not mean an unstylish person.
True. True.
Whereas, it
And
is, I mean, frankly, as someone who works with opera singers, it's a delicate issue because sometimes I want to say, this would look better on you. And not just women, men as well.
mm,
But I
yeah,
can't say that.
you have to know what your positives are so that you can exploit them, for lack of a better word. If you know that you have, like for me, I like my cheekbones and I like my hair, whatever. So I make sure that like that is a focal point. I might not like some other part of my body, so I do what I can to minimize that. And yeah, I mean, the more that you mentioned it, I never really thought about it before, but everything that I have, I guess, is one of a kind because I, in some sort of way, have put different things together that are not normally there, or I've had something maybe made. You can still occasionally find people in Europe that will make something for you. I think it's much harder to find that in the States where it can be affordable.
Yeah.
And other countries even more so than here. Especially like India or when I
Mhm.
was in Saudi Arabia, I got some really beautiful abayas that were made for me. Um, and yeah, it's interesting. It's yeah. And then also, the weight thing, since we were talking about it, has been hard for me my whole life. I've never really wanted to be a bigger person. Some people are bigger and they're happy in that and they're comfortable in their skin. I would not say that that is who I have always been. I've been really lucky with some costume designers like Giuseppe Paella, who did the Turandot that I did. They were the most incredible costumes I've ever seen in my life, and
They
I
are.
felt so beautiful in those costumes. Um, and if I could wake up every day and just wear his clothes, I would. But I've lost work, as I'm sure a lot of bigger singers have the same story. You know, a very famous opera house told me, if I was 60, 70 pounds lighter, I could choose what I wanted to sing, and that would be great. But if I wasn't, then I couldn't sing secondary roles because my voice was too big for that. And it's been hard. And, more recently, I had a contract with an opera house in Italy where they canceled it last minute because they said it was a new production with a famous Italian designer and he wanted skinny singers. And then it turns out that that designer never said that because I ended up working with him on something else. And, you know, the weight thing always comes up. I'm very happy to see that in the States, it seems like it's calming down. I've seen casting and I've seen things happening that would not have been possible when I was a young artist. And that makes me very, very happy because I think that opera can imitate life and exaggerate our emotions. You know, it's very much based on life, and there's no reason to think that because somebody's bigger they can't be a romantic interest.
Of course
Or,
not.
you know, I remember in college there was a tenor that was singing Pinkerton, and a news journalist had written, it's impossible to believe that anyone would fall in love with him. And that stuck with me. And when people said things to me about my weight, you know, it's hard and it sucks. And I think everybody in their own way has been judged superficially for things that are not their fault, for the way that they were born. It also maybe people who are skinny, like, oh, you disappear on stage. Like, yeah, but they sing their face off. Let them sing, you know? And if the
Mhm.
voice can affect somebody emotionally, that for me, that's all that should matter.
When the
And I'm
size
really
issue,
excited
yeah, yeah,
because, sorry, I'm really excited because my big blonde, blue-eyed body is going to be singing Tosca in Italy. I'm going to be making my debut with Tosca in Italy, which is a big deal because Tosca is like the most sought after role in Italy to
yeah.
sing. And it was the hardest. It was the one that the agents and everybody were always like, you know, you're never going to get to do this in Italy because there's so many people who want to sing it and you just don't look it. However, Italians in general are not as judgmental towards me. Like I've been on TV a lot here and I've done a lot of things like that. And they're like, you're just a big Barbie. And it's kind of
Mhm.
like a personaggio thing that I look the
Yeah.
way that I do. But I'm super excited to be able to do Tosca in Italy without anybody talking about my size or
So let's
yeah.
talk about the role of Tosca. Uh,
Okay.
I've worked on many productions. Um, I I've seen Toscas in all sizes and shapes. I
Mm-hmm.
once worked on a production with Montserrat Caballé,
Ah,
who was a
yes.
large woman,
Queen.
and the tenor was Luciano Pavarotti, who was a large man. And I don't remember who the Scarpia was.
Okay.
I should look it up. It could have been Samuel Raby, who I adore. But
Wow.
the thing was, it was two large people in the leads, and
Mm-hmm.
Luciano had very bad knees. And when he had to face the firing squad in the last act, um, we had bags of lentils behind him, and he would fall onto the lentils because they didn't make a sound, and he
Oh,
would be cushioned, and Calbier would say "Ecco l'artista," and "O Mario non si muovere," and he was, the character was dead. Um, I don't know. They sang so magnificently. It didn't matter that,
who wouldn't pay to go see that today?
and
Who
also,
would not?
and Courtney, I'm thinking now of something because I worked with her a lot on this role, and she taught me many things about Tosca, but one of them was never forget. She said, in effect, she was a very charming, funny woman. She said, yes, she has been to bed with men because Tosca has had experience. She's not a virgin.
Right.
She's an experienced woman in her mid-30s.
Mm-hmm.
And she, by the way, is from Verona, which a lot of people don't know. And her religiosity comes from the fact that the Veneto historically was a lot more religious than Rome was.
Mm-hmm.
There's some old joke about why did they put the Catholic Church in Rome because it was full of Romans. But whereas the
Fair.
Veneto, whereas the
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Veneto is genuinely historically much more religious, and Calvi pointed that out. So her Tosca's relationship with the Madonna was very particular and genuinely felt. But my favorite moment among many was in Act Two when her Tosca understands that she's going to have to submit to Scarpia to save Mario's life. And how will she keep her ladylike way, but nonetheless have to submit to him and also be the size of Monsieur Cavalier? And most women who have enacted the role, even the very best ones, when they're near the table with the glass of sherry, vin di Spagna, and there's usually a roast beef or something on the table that Scarpia has been eating, la povera mia cena fu interrotta, um, she sees the knife, and the knife is usually next to the roast beef or on the table, and most Toscas sort of rear back as the music indicates, suggesting that, aha, there's the knife, and then she sort of grabs it.
Mm-hmm.
Albaye said to me, don't forget she's a lady, decides that she will not keep her earrings on when she's sleeping with this horrible man. So what
Oh,
Kaguya
wow.
does, she removes the earrings that presumably Mario may have given to her. She looks at them and lowers her hands together. And then she lowers her eyes to follow the hands to make sure that she's placing the earrings on the table, and she sees the knife. So she
Brilliant.
just simply, you can't see this, releases the earrings and picks up the knife and holds it to her chest. And
Wow.
then when he comes and says, Tosca finalmente mia, she already has the knife. And it made perfect sense because this Tosca was not surprised by the knife, but she made the active decision to do it.
Yep.
So, a questo bacio di Tosca, and then she turns. It made so much more dramatic sense. And it was
I
all
agree.
completely in keeping with the way Caballé thought through the role.
Yes. Yeah.
And
Um, the Tosca for me is one of the characters that I relate to the most. I mean, she is an opera singer. She is in Rome. We've been in the same places. And when you walk by Castel Sant'Angelo, which was originally a mausoleum for an emperor, and then the church built on top of it and all this other stuff, you realize that Tosca was just as big in the history of Rome as you are, which means you're not any less significant than Tosca, for example, or any different. And so there's so many things about her. I mean, I haven't killed anybody, but yet.
yeah,
But but there's so many things about her character that I relate to. A lot of people think the first act duet is just, silly and cute and whatever. But I think it's brilliant because you see how well these two people know each other. They know exactly which buttons to push. They know exactly how far to push them to get the response that they want, but they still get a little huffy. And I mean, I'm guilty of that in relationships. I don't know about you, but like it's so relatable about, like, you know what I mean? Like the little bit of jealousy that's there, even though she probably knows that he's not actually doing anything, but like, I'm gonna make sure he's not doing anything. Um, she's so brilliant, and I love that Caballé was able to do it without showing what she was doing. And I think, Callis was very similar to that. And then you watch Tibaldi's, which she's also an amazing singer, but everything is so shown. Like, and now I'm doing this, and now I'm doing that, which was a style in
yep.
that time. But I really love it when there's those super intimate moments where someone like Caballé can bring the audience in without a grand gesture, like almost the lack of that big gesture means more. And I was lucky enough to do her competition in Zaragoza, and she picked me to do a concert, and so I was able to work with her a little bit before she passed. And I when I when I first really had an opportunity to talk to her, she was sitting down, and she was tiny anyway. She's not a very tall person, and it was just my natural reaction to like get down on my knee and kiss her hand. You know, like you could just feel that you were around this greatness, and not just because she was an amazing singer, but also just her energy and who she was. You know,
Mm-hmm.
she is amazing. Sorry.
She, among opera singers, had among the most expressive hands that I'd ever observed. And
Mm-hmm.
so, for example, in the final duet of Andrea Chenier that she did beautifully with Jose Carreras and others, but especially Jose Carreras, her character, her Madalena, has decided that she will step in for another woman and save that woman's life and go to her death in place of that woman. Salvo una madre. I'm saving a mother so that she could be with her child. And Caballier's hands would sort of caress the air. And it
Mm.
was always very interesting that she would create a space in front of her, and usually her black dress or gown, so that you could see her white hands against the black dress.
Wow.
And the best word is actually describe, which doesn't mean to narrate or recount, but to find space in the air where the hands would describe the emotion.
Mm.
Amor, amor. And everything about her hand gestures made perfect sense. So at the end of Tosca, in the production we worked on, um, she informed everybody that she was not going to, sorry, she was not
No,
going
you're.
to do the famous, she was not going to do the famous jump at the end.
Oh.
So how do you stage that where you don't have her jumping off the parapet of the Castel Sant'Angelo? She went to stage left,
Mm-hmm.
and again, I'm showing it on the screen, but she was wearing black, not red the way Toscas sometimes were red in early dawn after having gone to um, the Palazzo Farnese in the second act. But what she
Mm-hmm.
did was she went O Scarpia avanti a Dio. I'm not a singer, Dio. And her hand moved in such a way, one hand would go this way and the other that way,
Oh,
that
wow.
it's as if she
She was.
was indicating where she was jumping off, and she was jumping off the side of the stage, not the parapet in the rear. And it made sense because, yes, the parapet is everywhere around her, not just in the back of the stage where
Right.
Hildegard Behrens had jumped from and other people, Eva Martone, but it was on the side as well. She
Mm-hmm.
really, really understood the stage and stage space
Yep.
and movement.
And also the river's on the other side of the angel.
That too.
Saint Michael, or angel, Archangel Michael is
Yep.
facing the river.
Yeah.
Not that you'd make it anyway. You have to
Right.
bounce off a lot of levels before you get there, but yeah.
It's true.
Yeah. And she's
So, I
brilliant.
mean, I
She's
point this
brilliant.
out because there are so many ways to interpret a role that are
Yes.
valid. And so
Yes.
many people, audience members, but also directors and casting agents and managers, expect the singer to do the conventional thing, or they expect the singer to do the absolutely bizarre thing that doesn't relate to what the story is about.
Mm-hmm.
And
I I like to know exactly where the director wants me to be for the light, and then I do what the words tell me to do every performance, which
mhm,
is never the same, you know?
yeah,
And I think that's the beauty of live theater, because if the tenor one night is one tenor who does a certain thing, and then the next night it's a different tenor, but you react the same way to both of them, it doesn't necessarily make sense,
right.
you know? So I don't know. I'm very much, I like I that's one of the things I love so much about opera, is being in a character and feeling the emotions that that character feels. And not every opera singer is that way. I think it was um Sir Alan, maybe, who was
Thomas
saying
Allen.
we don't sing, yep, we
Yep.
don't sing for ourselves emotionally. We do it for the audience. And it was a masterclass at the Met, and I just sat there the whole time like, I mean, I'm singing for the audience too, but I want to feel them. I mean, because everybody's different. Everybody goes about how they study a role differently. And yes, there are definitely moments where you have to take yourself out of the character and be like, okay, this phrase that's coming up, it's not easy, and I need to, think about the technique here for a moment. But yeah, I mean, you can feel it when a singer's in the character, like Maria Callas or something. She just became the character.
Mhm. Um, You, like many of my guests, provided a list that listeners can go to. It'll be on the
Mhm.
webpage. And you have two Maria Callas's Cavalleria Rusticana, which she sang. It's her La Scala recording, but she actually sang it only on stage in Greece in the beginning of her career. Her famous Tosca. You have Jesse Norman singing unreleased masters, including from Tristan and Isolde. But I want to talk to you about the singer Eileen Farrell, who
Yes.
you mentioned, who was a remarkable singer. I knew her somewhat. She was very
Did
plain
you
spoken.
really?
Yeah, sure.
Oh
Um,
my gosh.
my late and beloved friend Brian Kello wrote her biography.
Oh, Brian.
Yeah, and I don't know if you know that Brian died.
Yeah,
Brian,
yeah, and
he was
Scott
the
as
editor in chief
well.
of Opera News. We were very close friends, and he wrote her biography and loved her very much. And so we would hang out with Eileen through Brian, basically.
That's
And
so cool.
Eileen Farrell was married to a police officer in New Jersey. She had
Yes.
a salty mouth,
Yes.
very funny, but also fabulous singer.
Mm-hmm.
And I often think that the fact that she was kind of this bawdy person in some ways prevented her from getting roles like Gioconda and Brunhilde and so on and Isolde that she could have just sung naturally all the time. But
Right.
she did sing opera, but she also became so well known for her American popular song, Gershwin
Mhm.
and others, because she got the lyric and she got the spirit, and she didn't sound like a properly trained opera singer who was deigning to sing this George Gershwin person, but she really sang it.
Yes.
Why did you select Eileen Farrell?
For exactly what you just said. I think that she's fascinating. I don't think enough people talk about her anymore. And also just quickly, Brian Kello and Scott, his husband, like bless their souls. I miss both of them very
Yeah,
much. They were wonderful people and they supported all of us as young artists coming up, and Scott Barnes especially. I just had to say
was a
that.
wonderful teacher.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, yeah,
Amazing. And they were like you, three people who everyone looks to for advice and knowledge, because you all really do know these things and you have lived it, and the fact that all three of you are so giving with your time and energy to young artists is so wonderful. So yeah,
I
it was,
believe in that.
yeah.
And we miss Scott. Scott died of respiratory disease, and Brian unfortunately had glioblastoma, which is a very aggressive brain tumor.
Yes.
And he was like, I went to see him in the hospital, and what struck me about Brian, who had a wickedly wonderful sense of humor, but was also incredibly cultured. He's the person I think of most when I watch a film, when I read a book. I always ask myself, what would Brian have had to say
Mm,
about this? Because he
yeah.
was so versed in everything, in cinema, um, in Irish literature, in English literature, and so on. He was incredibly cultured, but so wickedly funny that
Hmm.
it was like Eileen Farrell in a way, that
Exactly.
it masked the erudition that was right
Yes. Yeah.
behind it because he
And
could be so funny.
it's true, and that's one of the reasons that I chose Eileen Farrell for the list. Something that the opera people may know or may not know that are my friends, and most of them know. I like to sing everything. And when I sing other things, I don't sing it like an opera singer. I will sing Whitney Houston and I will belt the notes. I will sing Defying Gravity and I'll belt. And I love jazz and I sing it in a jazz way. And not, again, not everybody's the same. I'm not going to say across the board what's good for everyone. However, I do think that it's possible for opera singers to sing other things and not sound like an opera singer. I think mastering your voice isn't just singing a specific technique. Um, and it also takes me back to James Levine as a young artist at the Met. the thing about James Levine, the musician, is he was so unique and brilliant. He could say something very, very simple, and it would completely change the way you sang an aria. Like people they want you to explain when they ask what it was like to work with him, and I would say, he explained the phrasing in the Trovatore aria like this, and it's something very simple, but it would change everything. And I remember, I believe I was working on Bocca Negra, Come in quest'ora bruna, which is a beautiful aria, and on paper it looks very simple, but it's
No.
very long, right? Very long phrasing. Kind of, it doesn't have a huge range, which actually can be more difficult because you don't get to like relax up or relax down. Um, and I was singing it in a master class, and he could tell that I was kind of just getting tied up in the technical stuff. And he stopped me, and this is a public master class, so there's like an audience, and he's like, Courtney, what did you sing when you were younger? And I was like, what do you mean? And he was like, what did you sing when you were younger? And I'm like thinking through the stuff that I loved to sing when I was little and embarrassed, and I was like, The Little Mermaid, or Somewhere Over the Rainbow, and he's like, The Little Mermaid. Can you sing me The Little Mermaid? And I was like, sure. And when I sing The Little Mermaid, I do a little Disney voice, which would not be something you could hear in the Metropolitan Opera in the back row, right? Like it's this tiny, like, look at this stuff, isn't it neat? Right? And so I was like, okay, but it's not what you want for Bocca Negra, my 22-year-old self thinking I knew better than the maestro. And so so I started singing it a little bit bigger. And he was like, no, I want you to sing it like you did when you were little. So I was like, okay. So I sang The Little Mermaid, and he was like, that's great. You could totally sing a Disney princess. It's great. Now sing Come in quest'ora bruna with that voice. And I was like, what? And so I did it, but it was interesting because in doing that, I found my real voice in that music. It took me out of putting this sound in and making it this thing that you think it has to be. And did I sing it with that tiny, tiny little voice in the end? No, but it reminded me of who I was, And I think as opera singers, it's very easy to get confused or taken a little bit off track occasionally. And I think part of the thing that you can hear even in Eileen Farrell's opera recordings is the honesty in her sound. It is so her. And most of the great, great singers, Leontine Price, you listen to her sing, it's Leontine, and it's because they're not trying to sound a specific way. And I think when you sing different types of repertoire, from jazz like she does, or the Gershwin or the Broadway, and she does it honestly from her voice and her personality, I think that's incredible, and it's a great learning tool. So yeah.
I was very fortunate for a very long time to have James Levine in my life as someone who I could ask questions to. And the arrangement we had when I was at the Met and after I left the Met was that I could have an hour a month where I could just come and sit with him and bring my questions, and he would answer. And I was allowed to disagree, although I wouldn't say I ever disagreed, but I would just ask a lot more questions because it was stuff I didn't know. And he would, say something fascinating about Mozart's 40th Symphony or about a Brahms song. And it was the invitation to ask even more. And so when you said to me now that in Come in quest'ora bruna, that he had you sing from The Little Mermaid and not from Somewhere Over the Rainbow, I think I know why. Because he conducted beautifully Simone Boccanegra, and that music of that aria specifically is maritime music. There are
For
the
sure.
waves. You hear the waves of the Ligurian Sea. And she's singing about this particular time of day and what she's experiencing. But underpinning that are waves the whole time, so that having you be, quote, under the sea made perfect sense.
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
him, in my experience, it was always that I would say to myself, don't disagree, but if you don't understand, just study more and you'll come to understand perhaps what he was thinking, what he was after.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
that, I once had the stupidity and the audacity to say that Brahms didn't do it for me. But I
Oh.
said that in a provocative way because it's true. Brahms was not my favorite composer, and I could recognize the genius, but I didn't necessarily feel about Brahms
Mm.
and the way I did about others. And he asked me, who does it for you? And I named a few composers. And then he said, who didn't do it for you, but now does it for you completely? I said, Schubert. I said, it took me a very long time to come to adore the music of Schubert. And it's harder for me than was Mozart, Rossini, and others. And he said, that's absolutely right. And he said, give Brahms a break.
I love it. I love it.
Just approach Brahms the way you approach Schubert with an
Mm-hmm.
open mind. So, I'll name the opera, Pelléas et Mélisande by Debussy.
Mm.
He adored it. It's not that I don't adore it, but it's not in my top 50 operas. And so rather than say no to it, I just keep studying it. Through
Okay.
him, I came to understand that Wozzeck, which we mentioned earlier, is a masterpiece. And,
Yes.
maybe when I was younger and less musical and less worldly, I didn't understand why it was a masterpiece. So recently here in New York, I went to a Philharmonic concert and there was Brahms on the program. And I thought of James Levine because I tried to remain open to it.
Mm.
And it didn't, I don't say that it will never move me, but there are just composers who move me a lot more.
Fair.
But part of what
And he
he,
had his favorites too.
of course he did.
Yeah.
And but he was so careful with his language, and not about being diplomatic, but he really expressed what he meant. So that one time I went in to talk to him because I had to give a lecture about Gluck's Orfeo ed Euridice, and he said to me, "There is no better opera," and that was such an interesting formulation
Wow.
because what he was saying in effect was there are other operas that are as good, but there
Mm-hmm.
is no better opera. And I still
Sure.
think about that whenever I attend that opera because I've always loved it.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of the first operas that hooked me on opera because I saw it when I was 11 with Grace Bumbry as Orpheus. And she, years later, not too many years later, 8 years later, I worked with her and I told her about having seen this when I was 11 and there I was 19.
Oh
And
wow.
she said to me, it was a 1967 production of the Met. She said, that is the worst costume I've had to wear in my whole career. She said, I looked like Muhammad Ali going into a fight.
Oh
She had
no.
silver boots and a silver cape and so on. And it was not what we would think of as a lyrical poet in ancient Greece. And, but, she was someone who, great theatrical sensibility, but also incredible musician.
Yeah.
Grace Bumpry was. And we forget that about her because she was so flamboyant that
Mhm.
her musical chops were rock solid. And she could do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And I mention all of this simply because, as you've reminded me, it's part of my job to document and pass along what people have told to me. I
Yeah.
see that as
Yeah.
part of my mission. That
Yeah. It's a beautiful thing.
I've been fortunate to learn so much, and one of the reasons I do this program is so that people watching can get to know people like you, but
Yeah.
also so that it brings out of me memories. For example, I never spoke about Monsieur Caballier's Tosca before. So
Really
no, never. Not because I
amazing.
was hiding it, it just wasn't
Didn't
prompted in
come up.
me. Yeah. So because, opera is a living, breathing, beautiful art form, the most beautiful to me, um, that keeps evolving. But we
Yes.
have to remember what we've learned and remember what we've been taught, not because it's gospel, in other words, not because we have to believe it's right,
Mhm.
but because it's part of the fabric of memory of opera. And if we cut that fabric, if we let go of it, uh, kind of like the rope in Gotterdammerung, if we cut it, there goes memory. Um, it doesn't get passed along.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's
So
true.
one of the many things I liked about you from the first time I met you was that you, to me, were clearly connected to the creators of the past in opera.
Oh yeah.
And I have worked with many younger artists, which is to say in their 20s and 30s, um, who I asked them, who are your favorite singers from the past? And one of them said to me, her voice was a Strauss Mozart voice. She said, Renee Fleming.
Renee. I knew you were going to say Renee.
And I said,
Renee's
Renee
past what,
Fleming is
a year?
not
She's been retired a year? Like, is she
Renee
even
Fleming is
really
not
retired?
from the
Probably.
past. And I said, who else? And she said, Kiri Takano. I said, yeah, Kiri Takano is not from the past. She's retired, but we have her recordings and she's still with us in life.
Yeah.
But at least this woman knew two of the great exponents of the repertory that she wanted to sing,
Yes.
because
Um,
many others don't.
I was lucky, again, but this was after I met you. I've always been very interested in the singers of the past and hearing different people's interpretations. And I had a very good friend who was very, like when I told him I was working on the four last songs, he got every single pirated copy of the four. This was before everything was on YouTube. And we listened to every one's until I was convinced that Martina Arroyo's was my favorite for that.
Why were
But
How come Martina, who I adore, we're good friends. I've taught at her foundation. How come Martina Royal's four last songs were the best?
I don't, I don't know. I think it was the color, the colors she used. And I know Martina very well as well. We have a
Yeah.
history. And she is a diva with a capital D. I love
Yeah.
her. And her incredible singer. Um, she could have been way more famous, even, I think, because
Well, she was
no.
considerably famous and she won a
Yeah,
Kennedy Center honor, but I know what you're saying.
yeah. And there was just some sort of extra beauty in the sound in
There
those
is.
in that recording that I mean there were so many great recordings that we listened to, but that one in particular, when something just touches you in a certain way. I should have put that on my list. I don't know if it's on the Adagio site, but if it's not, I should add it. But
Okay.
it's an incredible recording. And yeah, it was just beautiful. And then when I went to the program in Cardiff with Dennis O'Neill, there was a man named Norman who was at one point a bass in Scotland Opera, I believe. And he was an older gentleman, and every Christmas he would give us like a special Christmas CD that he had made that year with all these famous singers singing Christmas songs and whatnot. But we would have an hour with him a week, and he would pull recordings and actual albums that he thought that we should listen to based on the rep we were working on or what we were talking about. And there were things that most people wouldn't necessarily hear because they were something that had been out of print forever. And I listened to all of the old ones where you think the recording's not so great because it's so old, but then there's some sort of something in the sound that they have still that modern technology might take that out, kind of,
Hmm.
because voices recorded are different than live, obviously, as you know. And I remember, I believe it was a Sonnambula that he was playing for me, and it was a random part in the opera. And it was Maria Callas, and she did this primal noise. Like, I don't even know how to describe it, but it was because she was so in the character and it was on pitch and whatever, but it was not singing. And because it
Hmm.
was a live performance, and it was just like, I made him play it like 5 times
Yep.
because it was like nothing I'd ever heard before because she was so in the moment. And I think it's so important for young singers to listen to those recordings because a lot of them are live. And a
Hmm.
lot of what you get of the singers now, like Renee, who's amazing. Renee had this magical thing whenever I saw her in the Met when it was an aria or something. The first thing I saw at the Met, first opera, was Susanna by Carlisle Floyd. It was the debut of the opera. I was coming to New York to look at colleges, and we got really lucky. This couple let us have seats next to them because I had my leg bandaged, and I was sitting right behind Carlisle Floyd. And Renee was singing Susanna, and I think Nathan Gunn was Little Bat, and Sam Raimi was
Olin Blitz.
Right.
Yep.
And that opera and everything, Thais, that I saw her sing many things. She had this thing where when it was her aria, the world stopped. You could hear a pin drop. Like it was like air suspended. And Renee could do that more than anybody else of the people that I heard singing at the Met. And there were a lot of people that I heard singing at the Met that were incredible for what they did for their thing. Samuel Raimi is a beast. Like his voice is just otherworldly. I think I heard Samuel Raimi sing more than anybody else. He's incredible. And then Aprile Milo, the sheer size of the voice and everything. Like there's so many great singers and reasons to hear them, but that about her was incredible. But you don't get those things in her recordings because most of them are not live.
Yep.
And I think that a lot of young singers don't realize that singers make mistakes. If you listen to live recordings, you'll hear Joan Sullivan say a wrong word. You'll listen to Montserrat Caballé not sing the words, but it doesn't matter because you know exactly what she's saying. And maybe someone, whoops, they've forgotten an entrance or whatever. And I think it's very important for young singers to realize that we are human, and audiences to also understand that we're human. And things are not always perfect. But because of that live aspect, things are more magical. And other things happen that you don't necessarily hear in a recording in a studio because of it. And I remember, again, Maestro Levine talking about Pavarotti in recordings. And he was like, oh, he was hard because he would think too much when he was in the recording studio. And so he'd be like, okay, great. Let's record. And they would record and record and record. And then Pavarotti would be getting in his head more and more. And so then Maestro Levine would finally say, okay, we got it. It's the best. It's great. It's perfect. Let's just do it one more time for fun. They would do it one more time for fun. And that was always the track that they kept.
Sure.
Because then he wasn't worried about it. It was like a live performance. He wasn't thinking about everything being exactly the way it was supposed to be. And it would have that Pavarotti magic in it.
Luciano often said to me, and not just to me, that his biggest preoccupation was that he was expected to sing live in competition to the recordings that everyone knew intimately because they all owned his recordings.
Of
and
course.
They knew exactly how he sang La Donna Mobile. And if he sang it a little differently live, they'd say, no, that's not the way he did it on my record.
But it's still him.
Of
he
course.
can do it.
Of course. Often he would do it better.
The pressure on a young artist that thinks they have to sound like Pavarotti's recording every time they get up and sing.
Yep. I want to correct a small correction, something you said, because no, don't apologize. Everyone makes this mistake, almost everyone. So I just want to put out the correction. It's not the 4 last songs. It's 4 last songs.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. Don't apologize. But the reason is Strauss intended that these 4 songs be about finality, about conclusion, about summing up, whatever we want to call it. But they were not the 4 last songs that he wrote. He actually wrote a song called Malven, Malven, that came after, but it was not part of the group of 4 last songs.
Okay.
But this group of 4 songs is known as 4 last songs. And he wrote it for a big voice, the sort of Lotte Lehmann type voice. Deborah Voigt sang it in that style. Jesse Norman kind of sang it in that style. But it came to be known in 2 styles because soon after Lotte Lehmann sang it, Elizabeth Schwarzkopf sang it in her way. Right. So then you had the Lisa Della Casa, the Kiri Te Kanawa, and the Renee Fleming doing that line. And then you'd have the Deborah Voigt and Jesse Norman line. But I think that your observation about Martina Arroyo is interesting, and I will go back and listen to that recording. Martina got both lines together.
Yeah, I was just gonna say maybe it's because she's right down the middle.
Yeah, yeah.
And
So
yeah, it's interesting actually. That could literally be what it is.
yeah. So now I'm
Yeah.
I'm assuming it's on Adagio, and if it's not, my friends in Berlin will put it on Adagio very quickly.
Yay.
Um, because Martina Arroyo is a marvelous singer.
She is.
So Courtney Ann Mills, did I
Yes.
leave anything out that you would have wanted me to discuss?
Oh my gosh, I don't even know. I think it's good.
I think I think we covered a lot, and my
Yeah.
goal was that people get to know the person I know and go hear you sing your Tosca and everything else that you are singing and follow you. I'm just gonna add one more thing. You are also a public speaker,
Yeah.
and public speaking, which is something I do a lot of, is very different because no one wrote my music, so to speak, and no one wrote my libretto. And there are people who are public speakers who read from a text, and then there
Mm,
are people who may have one page of notes and speak improvisationally and speak from the heart off the cuff. What
yes.
kind of public speaker are you?
Definitely off the cuff. I like to I map out everything of what I'm thinking in my brain, and then when it's time to do it, I actually just do it. And it's interesting because it's not something that I ever thought that I would do. But as you know, during COVID, I became one of those balcony singers. Italy put out this news press thing saying like we're going to play a couple songs on TV and everyone goes outside and sings together. And I did, and I was sleeping at my place, but I was also going to my friend's house, but I was isolated with them. So they were the only people I was seeing because she owned a restaurant. She had a lot of food. So I would go over and stay with them, and then I wasn't totally alone.
Mhm.
And we would have nice meals, and then I would go and sleep in my apartment. And the neighbors there didn't know that I was an opera singer. So I went out and I sang with everybody, and then the neighbors were like, "Do another song, do another song." So I sang Time to Say Goodbye. And I know a lot of opera singers, I'm not a big Bocelli fan, but I'm a Bocelli fan. Time to Say Goodbye has brought me a lot of luck. And also, if he brings people to the opera, God bless him. But so I sang that, and then I got a Formula One contract out of that. So I sang for Heineken. I did a commercial with them at Formula One and all of these other things. And one of the things that came out of this video, because it went super viral, my friend posted it on Facebook after I asked her not to.
Mhm.
Because it's COVID and I look a hot mess in this video. And it's literally everything wrong. Like, if you're telling a singer how to make a video that's going to be nice and whatever, you don't cut it off before the high note. She stopped
No.
filming right before the high note. Like, my Italian's a little wonky. I look a mess. Like, it's just not the video you want to share. But she shared it anyway. And 16 million views. So
Wow.
then I got called for the Heineken commercial. I got calls for this, that, and the other. But the most beautiful thing was I got messages from all around the world. And again, that talks to what music can do. And it was, nurses saying they were taking their time in a break and listening to my song, like over and over. Or, someone was sick or someone died, and my song meant something to them, which was not at all what I was expecting. In fact, I was embarrassed for her to share the video because I thought of what I looked like, which at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you look like. And it brought so much to other people, but it also brought a lot to me because I was in a country without my family, and I got all these beautiful messages to respond to, and everything else. And one of the people who reached out to me is a general something for the United Nations, and she asked me to start speaking with the United Nations when they were doing Zoom talks and things like that. And I remember one of the first ones, they were doing a different theme or a different one of their goals a
Hmm.
day. And so they gave me gender equality. And I'm sitting here like looking at who I'm going to be speaking with. And there are women from countries where there's genital mutilation and men can beat their wives and like literal, like really big differences in gender equality. And I'm like, how am I, as a female from the States who grew up pretty much able to do what I want to be able to do, supposed to talk about this and have it make sense with other people who have experienced it? I don't want to talk about those things when I haven't experienced it and the other woman who's going to be speaking has. It's
Mm-hmm.
not my place. And so I went into it and I was able to speak about how music and culture and the right to express yourself is so important, and especially for women as well. And it went really, really well. And it was not anything that I was nervous about it. I wasn't expecting it to be something that would become part of my life, but it
Mm-hmm.
did. And I won an award for having the best talk of the day, shockingly
Good.
enough.
Good.
And so yeah, but again, the public speaking came from the singing. It came from, that part of you that when you sing, you want to share with people. And so
Mm-hmm.
when I do speak, I feel like I tap into that. And I'm sure you do too, that part of you that you feel like this could give some goodness or something to somebody else.
Yeah,
If that makes sense.
it does. And then I won't go into too much detail about this, but you remind me of the fact I don't get nervous in front of audiences. I kind of love it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but audience members can be distracting. And
Yeah.
sometimes I'm in theaters where the lights are up. And I don't want to go into great detail, but there was a gentleman in the third row who was very inspired either by me or by something I was saying and made that visual. And it was very distracting because number one, his wife was next to him. And number
Mm-hmm.
two, I had a camera on me and I could not register any kind of shock or indignation or whatever. And you just have to work through it and not look and not lose your train of thought, because if your audience picks up that you're nervous or distracted, they become uneasy.
100%. A
Yeah.
hundred
So
percent.
you have to make them comfortable with you. And then you could say almost anything, almost.
Oh yeah, and then
Yeah.
the energy is reciprocal. Your
Yeah.
energy goes to them, theirs comes to you, and since we're talking about reactions and energy and everything else, this is something that I never thought that I would broadcast to the opera world. But here we go. Um, Living in Rome, I was married to an Italian. It was not a great ending to the relationship, but um, with COVID and everything else, we all get creative. I started singing in the piazzas, which interestingly enough, Kiritano was also a busker. So,
Hmm.
but I don't do it all the time, and I do it when I want to, and I can wear whatever I want to. And again, going back to thank you, Bocelli, for your time to say goodbye. It's been helpful.
Hmm.
But I sing O Sole Mio. I sing O Mio Bambino Caro, which is not my rep, as you know. And I sing Time to Say Goodbye. And I absolutely love it. I would never do it in New York City, but in Rome, there's like this magical thing, like in front of the Pantheon, singing some opera and seeing children
Stop.
for the first time hear
Yeah.
something like that, and they stop. There was
Yeah.
this little girl, I remember, she just started dancing and coming up to me. And then at one point, another night, like there was a little boy that was like attached to my leg while I was singing. And and also, interestingly enough, sometimes these guys will come up and they're dressed in like all black and they're like, mm-hmm. And they're like, I had no idea, but I love opera. And I'm like, thanks. And they're like, yeah, I listen to like Metallica and heavy metal, and but this was cool. And I think it's probably the vibrations are kind of similar. But if you think of the Metallica album with the orchestra, that's an incredible masterpiece, right? Um, but yeah, so there are so many rules in the opera world. And as I've gotten older, I've broken a lot of them. And usually it turns out to be a good thing. I don't think most opera teachers would suggest that their students go into the street and sing in a piazza for people some songs that aren't necessarily their repertoire or anything else. But it has given me a whole other point of view on sharing music and performance and
Hmm.
seeing people's honest reactions. People cry, people come up and hug me, people ask for the photos. Um, and it's such an honor. It's also weird and scary when people are crying, but it's an honor to be
Hmm.
able to give somebody an experience. And from that, people have asked me to come and sing while they propose for their for to their fiance, or it's opened up doors and it's made introductions to people that I would not normally have met. And I just think if you have something inside of you that is beautiful and you want to share it with other people, you should never apologize for doing it, and you should
Hmm.
find ways to do it. And it doesn't
Yep.
have to necessarily be the traditional path. um I'm still singing traditional opera in theaters and I love it, but I and like I said earlier, I say no to things that make me uncomfortable, or I don't think it's necessarily going to go the way that it probably should go. But I've learned to say yes to things that in the past um people would have maybe suggested is not necessarily the right thing to do. And I sing different kinds of music and I sing in different places that are not traditional places, and it's made my life more vibrant and I
Hmm.
love it. So that's the scoop.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Courtney Mills, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And when I next get to Rome, obviously we're going to have dinner.
I
You'll
can't
go
wait.
sing in a piazza, and I'll say, I knew her when I knew her back in New York when she was a young artist.
And it's always funny because people are like, you should do X Factor or America's Got Talent, or you should sing in a theater. And I'm like,
You should sing in a theater.
I sang at the Met. And they're all like, but yeah, it's
Thank you
fun.
very much.
Thank you,
It
Fred.
was a
And I
pleasure to
miss you
visit with
very,
you.
very much.
Likewise.
Hope to see you soon.
Likewise.